Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's My Game show. And as you can see, we're going to be talking about share option schemes. It's going to be a really interesting show, and we're joined by Martin Cooper, who we will come to in a moment. But first, Choky Mike.
Yeah.
What's the matter
Well,
with you?
basically, to cut a long story short, I've got COVID. Literally 15 minutes on a train to Birmingham with no mask on because I'd forgotten to put one in my coat. I get this. I mean, I'm fabulous and everything. I'm great. But Mrs. Ames has put me in choky. So there I am in my boudoir. So that's me. So why are you snuggly, Kirsty, then? Why is that then? I wonder.
Because I'm freezing, so I'm wearing 2 jumpers and a coat because I refuse to put my heating on because I'm cheap.
I like that about you. Okay, now let's crack on because this is quite a popular subject and quite a few people are interested in it. I think it's massively important, especially if you're a small business. Most people watching this will be recruiters, no doubt. And so it's really important because we know you have to kind of incentivize and time people in lots of different ways. And share option schemes are one of those ways, as you'll discover in a moment. Now, we are joined by Martin Cooper of RSM, one of the international recruitment firms. Martin is the reward and incentives partner for RSM. And it turns out part of that is share option schemes. And he tells me it's the biggest part. So clearly it's very popular. You will see we haven't got Martin's face on there. We had a few technical difficulties. So we're going to go with sound only and see how we do. So welcome to the show, Martin. Are you there?
I am there. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kirsty.
Good.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you, Martin. And I know that there are a lot of people watching this, so we're going to jump right in. As always, guys, if there are any questions or queries that you want to ask Martin as we go through, please put them in the comments and I'll try and bring them up as much as I can. So, Martin, the first thing I sort of want to go into is why should I care about share option schemes? As a business owner, why are they useful? Why are they something that's got so much popularity?
I think there's a lot of different reasons why people come to share option schemes. The driver can be maybe you're trying to recruit a new key member of the team and you need to be able to give them an enticing package to bring them in. Or equally, it can be to help you retain somebody that's really important to your business and that you see as a risk of leaving the business. And that's something that we see particularly at the moment when in many sectors the recruitment market's really tight. It's really hard to get good people and keep hold of them. So that recruitment and retention piece is key. The other factor is to incentivize and encourage your people that you've got in the business to achieve your goals. And often when you're doing incentive schemes, whether it's share options or something else, it's about aligning the interests of your employees with the interests of you as a shareholder and the interests of your business. So if you have a particular objective in mind, it's actually putting in place a scheme that encourages your people to deliver that.
Can I just dive in there? Because I've had two. Well, I wouldn't say the first one was a share option scheme. We gave shares out is what we did. But I've had two schemes that paid money out. The first one paid out about 3 million, I think, just over. The second one was less than that, about £1 million. And for me, what you've just said absolutely rings true. You know, we didn't lose a single senior person, key person in our organization, not one in 10 years. We installed our share option scheme really early on. And although we didn't do it properly, I'll be talking about that later. In actual fact, it really worked well for us, massively so. You know, I can't. One of the reasons I've got you on the show, actually, because I am such a big fan of share option schemes.
Oh, Martin, you're muted.
Yeah, Martin, you're muted.
Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can unmute Michael. No, Martin. No. So
okay, we're gonna have to.
It's okay. It's okay. So I know that another one, Mike, while you try and get Martin back, see if you can ring him on the mobile. Another thing that is very, very common and is a real benefit of share option schemes is as a preparation for sale, whether that is an MBO, which we've previously spoken about before and how they are becoming ever more popular, or if it's an actual sale, like a trade sale, as it were, that they're a good way to prepare for both of those. So
I think we have Martin back now on speakerphone.
I'm back now. Sorry about that, guys.
It's okay, Martin. It's okay. We technical issues happen to us all. They've happened to us many times on this show. So it's all fun and games. So I think we definitely understand why share option schemes are so important and so useful. So just for those of us who maybe don't know, and it could be me I'm talking about here, can you just give us a very brief overview about what a share option scheme actually is? Like, what is it?
Yeah, so in the simplest sense, a share option is just a right to buy shares in the future. So if you're giving your employees a share option, you're not actually giving them shares today, but what you're giving them is a right to buy them at a future point in time. And you're also going to set the price that they can buy them at that future point in time today. And so you're generally not going to be asking your employees to pay anything for their share options. And the point in time when they can exercise, well, that comes back to what your purpose of your share scheme is. In many private companies, a share scheme is about encouraging people to work towards an exit event, a sale of the business, an IPO, whatever it might be. And in that situation, normally the employee is only going to be able to exercise their share option when they get to that exit, when they get to that sale. And so at that moment in time, they exercise their option, buy the shares, and then sell those shares to the buyer so they get to participate in the value of that sale.
Can I ask a question? How are share option schemes viewed by potential purchasers if that seems to be the route that the company is going down to sell out? What is it an attractive thing to them, or does it matter?
Interestingly, I work with a lot of private equity houses who buy a lot of companies, and they almost invariably see a share option scheme as a positive thing about a company, because what it's saying is that you've not just got one founder who set up the business that is the business. You've actually got a management team who are critical to the business, and ultimately a buyer is often buying a management team as much as they're buying a product or a service or anything. And so if you go into a sales process and you've got your top 5 people, let's say, incentivized with share options, what you're saying to a buyer is, I've got a really strong management team here and they are critical. It's not just all about me. This is a proper business with a proper team.
The other thing around that, as well as I recall from both of my sales, is that the buyers obviously put the same restrictions on the key people who'd got share options, as they put on me for buyout purposes. In other words, you couldn't just take the money and go. To get all the cash, they had to stick out for the earnout, not buyout, sorry. They had to stick around for the earnout to get all of their cash. So again, both sets of buyers really like that, is that the key people were really going nowhere for the 3 years after the sale. Do you find that when you talk to potential buyers?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And it's often a point that's raised by businesses when we're putting in place share schemes, is that they don't want to put in place a scheme that means that when the business is sold, all their key people have a big windfall and can go off to the beach somewhere. They actually want a scheme that means that the buyer knows that their people are committed to staying with the business, particularly during the first year or two of the critical transition period. So sometimes you build in particular features into the share option scheme itself to facilitate that, some kind of tie-in, or other times it's something that the buyer will just put in place when, as in your example, Mike, they come along and maybe there's some shares offered as part of the consideration, or there's an earn-out where you get paid it over a number of years. And those kind of features can help ensure that your management team are committed after the deal as well as to achieve the deal.
Well, wash my mouth out with soap on this now, but I've got to mention KPMG. They did the first sale, and once they found out we had this scheme in place, they went big on it. They really used it as a leverage when they were talking to potential buyers. And I think partly that was because they'd known about recruitment companies selling and then everyone disappearing. And the fact that that wouldn't happen with us, they seem to think there's a massive benefit. It's a real selling aid to attract people in. So that did work, I think.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. And to drop in, I'm from a tax background, so I might drop in 1 or 2 boring tax points along the way. But another thing that can be attractive on a sale with the share option is that usually you're going to get tax relief, corporation tax relief on the whole value of that gain. So let's say you have £1 million gain between your employees, then that produces, at the current rates, £190,000 of cash benefit at the time of the deal. That's going to go up when corporation tax rates goes up. And from a seller's perspective, for listeners that are business owners today, often a buyer will just pay you pound for pound for that tax relief. So that's quite a nice sweetener as well at the time of a transaction.
That didn't happen to me. That sounds very sweet, actually. I like the sound of that. Can I ask another question then on behalf of the... By the way, if people listening have got questions or they're interested, please ask them and we will relay them onto Martin. But one question I had, supposing you weren't able to sell your recruitment company, your plan was not to build a saleable business. It was to build a cash cow lifestyle business. So you're going to get a team together, which is quite stable, have a great time, earn some money, but really nobody was going to spend a lot of money to buy it from you. Can you still use a share option scheme, say as a prep for an MBO or something?
So you can, and I think that brings home just one of the critical points when designing a share scheme is thinking about where the business is headed, and that point about getting back to the objectives of putting in the scheme in the first place. So if you are not working towards a sale, either because you don't want that or because you think this type of business is not easily sellable, then you have to have some other kind of event that's going to realize value for management, and you have to be able to communicate that to them. Because otherwise, if you give them an option and they think, well, I just can't see how this is ever going to bring home any cash for me, then that can actually become quite demotivating. So yeah, if an MBO is the ultimate outcome, that can be factored in, or even if there's not going to be an MBO, we put in place share option schemes in businesses that are intending to stay in the same ownership indefinitely. There are ways to do it. It can be more tricky, but there are ways to do it. But it's just thinking again about, well, what are we trying to achieve here, and how do we get something that actually works for the business, actually works for our employees?
So if you were building a cash cow lifestyle business with no desire to sell at the end of it, and you put a share option scheme in, what would the benefits be to the employees? What would you use to sell it to them, in a sense?
There's two benefits, I suppose, that we see people focus on with their employees. So in some businesses, they want their employees to be able to get shares and be able to receive dividend income.
Okay.
So you could have a scheme that allowed at some point people to exercise their options to get dividend income, or maybe it's not a share option scheme, maybe it's a different type of share scheme where you're actually getting shares on day one. Go kind of hand in hand with that dividend income point is the fact that for some senior employees in businesses, it actually matters a lot to them to be a shareholder. That's an important point around their status, their feeling valued by the business, and so them holding shares almost for their own sake can be attractive to some people. And then the final way that you sometimes realise value in the absence of a sale would be a share buyback after a period of time. So sometimes you structure a scheme where employees might hold shares for a number of years, and then if the value of the business grows in that time, then the employees can have their shares bought from them and to actually enjoy some of that growth in value.
So that's kind of like a delayed bonus in a sense, isn't it? Linked to performance. So instead of paying people year by year, saying, well, look, stick with us, and if we get the business to this size, then we'll buy back your shares based upon a valuation or some formula or something that you put in place. Again,
exactly, yeah.
Designed to hold people in, isn't it?
Exactly, and it's again thinking about that alignment with shareholders. If your objective is not to sell, if your objective is to grow the value of the family business or increase profitability year on year, you should structure your arrangement around that. Otherwise, you have something that just isn't achieving what you want to achieve as a business owner.
We're going to come in a second. I know Kirsty wants to talk about kind of how you set them up and everything, but I got one last question on this. When I did the second scheme, we just did an EMI scheme, very straightforward. And there were a set of rules, I believe, which told us how many shares we could release to each person or each job grade. I can't recall it in detail now. I'll come back to that formula in a second with you, because I think people are going to want to know how they can distribute their share options. But in the first one, we made the mistake of giving shares out. That's how it started off. And we were giving everybody shares. I mean, the secretaries had shares, everyone had shares, which fitted in with our value set. You know, everyone's on the boat together. We're all going together. Come on, let's all share in the proceeds. But it made it terribly complicated when we came to sell, massively so, because there was no agreement set up to say that people had to sell if we wanted them to, which was a nightmare. Now, there is a way, isn't there? Is it something to do with C shares or something? I'm not really up on it, where you can actually give shares away. You can put a share option agreement in place so people have to sell if you want to sell. And presumably you could pay dividends on them if you wanted to. So is shares an alternative to share options for some companies?
Yes, it can be. And what's the best solution can depend on lots of factors, and tax is a key one of those factors. So you mentioned the EMI schemes there, Mike, and for many small and medium-sized businesses, they are the gold standard of share option schemes. The tax treatment is incredibly generous. usually employees will only be paying 10% tax.
Yeah, it was massively tax efficient. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's hugely attractive, and it's a government-backed scheme, the HMRC approved scheme, so it gives everybody a lot of certainty, and that can often be the best solution. But EMI schemes aren't available to every business, and where it isn't, then there are good alternatives out there.
On that, actually, we've had a couple of questions. So the first one is from Yvonne, which is, it's a bit of jargon, and I completely agree with you. What does EMI actually mean? What is an EMI scheme?
So EMI means Enterprise Management Incentives, which is the name that the government gave to the share scheme when they put in place. But essentially what it is it's targeted at small and medium-sized businesses. So there's a few tests you have to meet. So, for example, you have to have fewer than 250 employees and less than 30 million gross assets in the business. But what it's designed to allow is for those small and medium-sized businesses to be able to compete with larger businesses for top talent by being able to offer an extremely attractive tax-advantaged type of share option that big businesses can't offer. So we might see a tech company that's a relatively early stage able to offer an EMI option, whereas if you're Google, you can't offer an EMI option.
Okay. All right. And on that, we've had another question, which is from Nikki Larkin, which is, what kind of share option schemes are there for people who are exempt from EMI schemes? What's sort of the second best? You know, if you can't have an EMI for those reasons, what would you say? What would you almost recommend people go for?
So there are a number of other government-backed share schemes that are away from EMI that have less strict eligibility criteria. I'm not going to go through them all, but there's schemes like CSOP or SIP or SAYE, to give lots of acronyms. One of the most common structures, though, we see in the UK, where for companies who don't qualify for EMI, is using something called growth shares, which is different from an option. You're actually getting the shares on day one, but what you have is a hurdle built into those shares. So let's say your business is worth £10 million today. You might issue a special class of shares to employees that only allow them to share in the value above 10 million. And typically those growth shares won't have voting rights. Often they won't have dividend rights. And to follow up on a point you made, Mike, which is incredibly important, you're going to have provisions built in to make sure that on a sale, when the majority shareholders want to sell their shares, those growth shareholders have to sell alongside them, and they can't block a sale or anything like that.
I've just got a horror story on that one. Just give Kirsty, I know Kirsty's got more questions to come in, but when we were selling literally 11th hour, the week before, we had two things. One of the ladies who'd got shares hadn't signed the right paperwork, and she was on holiday, and it was a nightmare. In the end, we had to send a fax from a hotel to KPMG. It was a nightmare. But the other one was, which was more serious, one of the ladies, her son was a lawyer, and she was in for about 30 grand or something, so it wasn't massive. And she taking instructions from her son, she just said, "Well, I don't think I really want to sell these just yet." And it's like, and like the Americans are saying, "Well, we're having them all, or we're having none of them." So the whole deal rested on one person, not really fully understanding exactly what was going on. I'd urge everybody, get this right. Whatever you do, get it right, because if you don't, it's so stressful, and it could cost you millions in the end. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, I think that from what we were speaking to earlier, that seems to be the most common pitfall, Martin, is it not? Is kind of picking almost the wrong one, getting it wrong. Is would you agree with that?
It certainly can be a risk. I think you've got some pitfalls with share schemes that are more technical pitfalls, and then you've got some that are more commercial pitfalls. So technically, you could get the legal documentation wrong, so that, for example, somebody doesn't have to sell on a sale, which is going to be a disaster. You could get your tax wrong, so that when it comes to the sale process and you go through the due diligence process, the buyer says, "Well, hang on a minute, there's a problem with these share schemes, and there's going to be £500,000 of tax to pay." And one of the other hats I wear is acting for buyers on sale transactions, where we're looking at company share schemes and trying to see whether there's any problems with them. And so what I say is it's definitely worth putting in the time and effort up front to make sure you do it right. because a lot of times people don't do it right, and it's incredibly painful and expensive on a sale process, and in the worst circumstances can even derail a sale. So
Yeah.
Those kind of technical things, tax and legal points. Then you've also got the pitfalls, which are just more commercial, that some share schemes just don't have the effect that the business owners want them to have. And that can often be because employees don't understand them, or they do understand them, but it's not motivating them to do the right thing. So it's that focusing on the design of them and focusing on communicating them to staff. You don't just want to give your members of staff a complicated legal document which they don't understand and they put in a drawer. That's a waste of time and effort on the part of the company. You need to explain it to them so they get it.
One of my clients did exactly that. I'm going to come to Kirsty the questions now, but I'll just very quickly say I worked with them on the scheme, and they had a professional like you to help them actually build the scheme. And they presented it, and it was like, nah, so what? They just didn't get across what this actually meant and what they were doing to people. And they had to effectively relaunch it with a different set of communications, and it was okay the second time round. But I think that's a really key point, actually, Martin.
Okay. So I've got a couple of questions coming through. So one is from Greg, and he says, for a company with a turnover about 3 mil-ish, what would you say is the normal or the average cost of setting up a scheme? What would you say it would normally cost the owner of the business?
I'm going to sound non-committal here, but it is so difficult to give a figure because, in honesty, it does determine on so many factors, like what type of schemes you qualify for, how complicated your schemes need to be.
Could you give us a ballpark, though, Martin? Could you give us a finger in the air?
A range.
No one's holding you to this, but roughly they're going to spend this much.
You'd see for companies like that, they could spend less than £10,000, or they could spend 2 or 3 times that. It does depend, and it's obviously a balance for a smaller company to use this cash carefully. And often putting in place a share scheme isn't the first thing a brand new startup company is going to do, and quite rightly they're focusing on other things. But then also, if you try and do it too much on the cheap, you could end up with a scheme that doesn't work and gives you headaches further down the line.
My advice would be pay the money, save up your cash until you can have the right scheme, pay the 30 grand if that's what it is, and get it done right, because the danger of it, having experienced it myself, is horrendous. And it's too late then. It's surprise, panic and blame when it happens, but it's too late.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, we've had some really good questions coming through. So thank you so much. But I think the next thing I imagine a lot of people are asking is how would I actually go about getting a scheme? Is there something I can do myself, or is your advice to just speak to a professional who knows what they're doing?
I think it would be very unusual to actually do a share scheme yourself without any professional advice. I think that would be a pretty risky thing to do. I think that the first thing to do is have an informal conversation with somebody who regularly implements a lot of share schemes and just chat around, well, why are you thinking of putting a share scheme in place? How might it work? What's the sort of structure that would work in your business? And somebody that's going to spend a bit of time to actually understand your business, understand what you're trying to achieve, and then who's able to then deliver something that makes an impact in your business. Because if you're putting in place a share scheme and it doesn't have an impact on your people, it's a waste of time, and you may as well just save the amount of money you're going to spend on it. To have an impact, so you've got to get the right advice to get that right.
I think in recruitment as well, a lot of people who enter recruitment are very transactional. They can't think 3 years in advance. They're going to be somewhere else by then. And so it is about hiring the people that totally get, I'm in for the journey, and then I'll get a share of the payout at the end. So it's almost part of the recruitment process. This is what we do. Would that interest you? And I think if you want to build a stable team over time, those are the people that you want, and those are the people that will be attracted by a really good share option scheme.
I think that's right. And you see different reactions from employees. Some will say, not really interested, I just want the cash at the end of each month. And that obviously is going to tell you something about that individual and their long-term commitment and their approach to things. It might be fine to have some of those kind of people in a business, but you need some who are in it with you for the long haul, who are going to be in the business, be at your side until you reach your objectives, whether that's a sale or something else.
Okay, I know Kirsty's got a couple more questions.
I have quite a few questions, Mike.
Go
So
on,
if
then.
this is not important, then I need to
What
sweep
we'll
in.
do is we will carry on because there's a recording of this. So if you have to go, we'll carry on for as long as Martin can be with us to answer all the questions. So don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. So one question I've got is, if you already have an EMI scheme in place, which is about 3 years old, how easy is it to add additional staff members?
It's pretty easy. So normally you won't need to do a new EMI scheme. You can normally use your existing plan rules, and you can probably even repurpose your existing option agreements. It's worth getting somebody to check that they're still compliant with the rules today, but fundamentally you don't have to start afresh. What you will have to do with an EMI scheme, or what is strongly recommended to do, is re-agree the value of the shares with HMRC. So to maximise the tax certainty for everybody, it's almost invariably a good idea to actually write to HMRC, say this is the value of the shares, and get them to agree it in advance, and that makes, again, life easier on a sale. So it's very common, though, for a company to put in place an EMI scheme and then make a number of grants over the years as they work towards their objective.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got another one here from Neil, which is, what for an early stage startup looking to incentivize and retain their first few key senior hires with the view to MBO in 5 to 10, 15 years? Wait, let me read that again. I'm guessing, what would you suggest to somebody who's really early on, who probably only has maybe 1 or 2 employees and is looking for a very long term, like 10 or 15 years till they get an MBO? What would you where would you guide them to look or start a conversation on?
So I think the key thing to think about there is, what is a realistic time frame for your people to focus on? So most of the time I would suggest, for most employees, about 3 to 5 years is how far they can look out. You might get some people who are completely happy to take a 10, 15-year focus, and obviously a lot of entrepreneurs can do that. But for a lot of employees, that is a long time away. So you might have to think about those as individuals and think, well, is it going to mean anything to them if I make a share award and say you might get a payout in 15 years' time? One of the small techie point to be careful of is that EMI options can't last longer than 10 years. So if you think it might be longer than 10 years for an exit, you need to make sure they're allowed to exercise them just before the 10-year point. And
that would be tricky, I presume, because then they would own the shares, even though you couldn't sell. Is that right in that case?
Correct, yeah. So you need to make sure you have leave-up provisions attached to them, which is something that whenever employees are going to have shares rather than options, those shares need to have suitable leave-up provisions to mean that you don't have former employees wandering around with shares.
Sure. And presumably as well that they don't have to be A shares, so they don't have to attract voting rights or dividends or anything. That you can say,
it's been very common to have a separate class of shares for employees, and almost always not going to have voting rights because it's a small minority holding anyway. So voting rights aren't a great deal of use for employees.
Yeah. Okay. I know we've got a couple more questions coming in. We're going to try and answer them all, if you've got the time. But I had one as well. Is how do you have complete control over who you give share options to? Can you just randomly pick people, or do you have to follow a formula if it's a government scheme? What's the deal there?
There's never a simple answer in share schemes. Usually you can pick. So with schemes like EMI, CSOP, and also with non-approved schemes like growth shares, you can just choose who you want. You could just grant an option to one person, or you could grant an option to 5, and you decide the size of the awards. Some of the government share schemes are called all-employee share schemes. So Save As You Earn, or SAYE, sometimes known as Share Save, and SIP is another one, Share Incentive Plan. They have more defined rules about who you can and can't invite, and how you differentiate between people. So if you're looking for flexibility, something like EMI is the one to go for. And
so again, that would be something you would discuss with your advisor.
Yes.
Okay, Kirsty.
Okay, fantastic. So I think we've only got kind of the one question left. It's not necessarily a question, but Nikki said something about beware of some online share platforms, as they sometimes have holes and aren't very bespoke to your business. Is that something that you would echo?
So there are online platforms, and I'm not familiar enough with them to criticise them or praise them. What I would say is that you just need to make sure you are taking advice to get something that's bespoke to your business. Getting a vanilla standard template probably doesn't get you where you need to be, because it's not focused on your business, not focused on your people, and it's probably not going to be valued by your staff. So it does need somebody to think about it and help you tailor it so it has a real impact on day one in your business.
I know somebody that used an online lawyer to buy a house. He ended up buying the house but didn't own the garden. So I think it's a good idea to really just
I know who that was as well.
spend the dough and get it done properly. One last question really for you. People are interested in this, and we've just given half an hour, which is not enough time to cover it properly. Do RSM do seminars or webinars or kind of workshopy type things around this if people are interested to dig a little deeper? Excuse me.
Yeah, we do quite often, and do webinars on different topics relating to this. So you often focus on a particular thing, like it might be using shares in a private equity owned business, or having broad employee ownership, or share options for tech companies. But yeah, there's certainly content out there from RSM and other people on to help you develop your thought process in terms of whether it could be relevant for you.
Okay. Are you happy for me to just pop your LinkedIn up on the screen, Martin, so people can connect with you if they want to ask any more questions or just to learn more about those schemes?
Yeah, of course. And I promise I'll have fixed my video by the time anyone wants to speak to me.
There you go. So if anybody wants to learn anything more about those things that Martin just mentioned, there is his LinkedIn, and you can connect with him. So Martin, the last thing that I sort of want to ask you is, we always like to have this really practical, and I imagine, share option schemes, they're quite a big thing. So if someone's looking to do this for their business, or they're really interested in it, what would you say is the first step that person should take, the first thing that they need to do?
The first thing I'd encourage them to do is just think about, why do I want to put a share scheme in place? Because the answer shouldn't always be yes. It's thinking about what am I trying to achieve here? What's the purpose? What problem or what opportunity am I trying to address? And if you start with that thinking, then I think you're likely to end up with something that works for you and your business.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, I'm going to hand over to Kirsty in a second for a very quick roundup. I don't think we've got time to summarize everything. Way too much to summarize, actually. But I found that particularly useful. And I wish I'd met someone like you 30 years ago, because it would have saved me. Well, a lot of my people paid double tax they paid. Imagine how popular that made me, because we hadn't set it up properly. I know. I wish I'd done it properly. My advice is spend the dough, figure out what you need it to do, and design something to deliver just that for you, and it will be just fine. So thank you very much, Martin, for your input today. And I do apologize about the technology, but what can you do? We got round it as we do.
Great to speak to you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kirsty.
Okay, Kirsty, over to you. We haven't got next week sorted out, by the way, yet. So
it's exciting. So it's a danger zone. It's a danger one. But I think you've summed that up nicely, Mike. I think it's been a really fantastic show. Martin, you've been an absolute fountain of knowledge, and we've had some really great questions from everybody watching as well. So thank you very much, and we will indeed see you next week.